You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm going to start this show off a little differently. Instead of starting off with NFL news, there were a couple trending topics on Twitter yesterday that caught my attention. And I really want to partake, but I figured I'd save it for the show. Stephen A. Smith posted his top 5 quarterbacks of all time, and that sparked an interesting debate among football fans. And Stephon Diggs posted his top 5 wide receivers of all time. So, I figured I would partake. Seemed like an interesting thought experiment. I've never done top 5 quarterbacks before. I've never done top 5 wide receivers before. So, this will be fun. I'll start with quarterbacks. And firstly, let me just say that if your list is different from this, that's okay. There's no one right answer. There are just wrong answers. Like, if you're going to put Kyler Murray on this list, or Jimmy Clausen, or Ryan Leaf, yeah, that's a wrong answer. But there's no one right answer. My list is different from Stephen A's, and that's okay. It's designed to spark debate. I understand that. I'm happy to have the debate. Please tweet at me, at RealJacobValk, with your lists. I'd love to hear them. I honestly would. But what's bothered me about this conversation is all the mudslinging. Why? What's the point? This is a strictly opinion-based thing. Unless someone names an outlandish quarterback, or wide receiver, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, it's okay to have that disagreement. I'll tell you, it was tough for me to come up with the list. That's what I don't like about these types of things. They usually just result in mudslinging. I'm not gonna tolerate that. I'm not gonna engage in that. Like I said, I'd love to hear your list, but if you disagree with mine and call me an idiot because of it, you're getting blocked. Alright, that doesn't help anything. So here are my top 5 quarterbacks. From 1 to 5, it's Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, and Aaron Rodgers. Now, let me just say, it was really tough to come up with that 5th one. I was debating between Aaron Rodgers and John Elway. And all due respect to Elway, I'm not disparaging him at all. He has 2 Super Bowls, former MVP, Pro Football Hall of Famer, and has had a better career than most people can even dream of. He just wasn't as dominant as Rodgers. Does Elway have the better career? Probably. But that's not what this list is. This list is a combination of dominance and career. See, that's another thing with this list. How are you ranking them? If you're ranking them based on careers, then the people putting Dan Marino and Jim Kelly on it, no, you can't do that. They never won a Super Bowl. If you're ranking them based on dominance, then yeah, Marino probably belongs on that list. Kelly probably not. The way that I'm interpreting these lists are a combination of career and dominance. And I think when you look at those 5 guys, they fit that mold. You don't need me to extol their virtues, you already know them. If you disagree with my list, that's okay. I respect it. Like I said, I'd love to hear yours. Unless it's incredibly outlandish, in which case, I'm not going to engage you. But, no, if you put Elway on yours, if you put Marino on yours, if you put a guy like Terry Bradshaw, Troy Aikman, Otto Graham, Roger Staubach, that's fine. I really have no problem with people disagreeing on this. This is a strictly opinion-based thing, and there are a million facts to support a million different conclusions. There are some people that will strongly disagree with my list, and that's okay. I mean, this is coming from someone who loves to argue, who loves to scream and yell. I just don't see the need to do that with these lists. Unless they're incredibly outlandish, it's fine. I'll move over to top 5 wide receivers now. And number 1 is really obvious, Jerry Rice. If Jerry Rice is not number 1 on your list, then that's wrong. And if Brady's not number 1 on your list for quarterbacks, it better be for a really, really good reason. If you're going just on dominance, I can understand it. But if you're going based off career even a little bit, 6 Super Bowls trumps everything. So going back to wide receivers, Jerry Rice, obviously number 1. 2 and 3 were kind of tough. Not necessarily in who they would be, but just the order. 2 for me is Randy Moss. 3 is Terrell Owens. If you want to flip-flop T.O. and Moss, you can. I don't mind that at all. I just put Moss ahead of T.O. because Moss, I feel like, has had more of an impact on the modern game. You got Mossed, I think, is a little more prevalent than anything T.O. did. But if you want to put T.O. ahead of Moss, you certainly can. I don't mind that at all. Number 4 for me is Marvin Harrison. Peyton Manning's go-to guy for most of his Colts career. And the second best player to ever come out of Syracuse and hit the football field. Obviously the best is Jim Brown. Number 5 for me, I'm throwing a little bit of a curveball. And I'm not saying this to be combative. This is my honest opinion. I know there are a lot of people that are going to disagree with it. There are a lot of people that will have not even heard of this guy, which is an issue in and of itself. But if you look at his career and just do some research, you can tell that this guy, in my opinion, is without question the 5th best receiver in NFL history, and that's Don Hudson. Considered by most to be the first modern receiver, innovated the out-and-up route, 3-time NFL champion, 8-time All-Pro. Put that in perspective, he only played 11 seasons. 2-time MVP, 8-time receptions leader, 7-time receiving yards leader, 9-time receiving touchdowns leader, And when he retired, he held 18 major NFL records. I understand that most of his stats haven't stood the test of time, except receiving touchdowns. He's 11th on that list still, with 99. I think that's pretty impressive. 11 seasons, 99 touchdowns. That's pretty good. And this was back when we were still calling them split ends, not wide receivers. But they functioned the same way as wide receivers. It's really tomato. I'd be very surprised if anyone else outside of Green Bay had Hudson on their top 5. I think they should, but it's okay if you don't. If you have a guy like Steve Smith or Chris Carter or Isaac Bruce on your list, that's okay. Like I said, unless you have some crazy guy on there, it's okay to have a different opinion on it. I'll give you a perfect example. For school, I had to do top 5 anything. And I chose top 5 New York Yankees. And 1 to 5, I went Ruth, Gehrig, Mantle, Jeter, DiMaggio. Someone asked me where Mariano Rivera was. Other people said that DiMaggio should be ahead of Jeter, or Yogi Berra should be on the list, or Bill Dickey should be on the list. I couldn't argue with them. Dickey was a little bit out of left field, but I understood the logic. Again, it's okay to disagree on something like that. It's just that if you're going to put a guy like Aaron Judge on that list already, we have an issue. Or a guy like Gleyber Torres, or, Tanyan Sturts, or Esteban Loaiza. We're going to have an issue. But those are my top 5 quarterbacks and top 5 wide receivers. Like I said before, I'd love to hear yours, unless they're crazy outlandish. Tweet at me, at RealJacobValk. If you're civil to me, I promise to be civil to you. Okay, on to the NFL news, and I'll start with the Buccaneers bringing back Ndamukong Suh for 1 year at $8 million. And we all know the story with Suh. Great player, head case, but incredibly dominant. He kind of fell off last year a little bit, but still had a really good year. 69.7 overall grade last year, according to Pro Football Focus. To bring him back for a year at $8 million is very, very fair, and it just makes the Buccaneers that much better. They're a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I'm not going to go as far as to say that they're going to win it, but they certainly have a chance of it. No question about that. Moving on now to the Bengals, signing Von Bell for 3 years at $18 million. And that's a really good move for the Bengals. Bell has been a good safety in this league ever since he's been in it. They needed safety help. Jesse Bates didn't have a good year, and neither did Sean Williams. Bell makes a ton of sense for him. The contract is very reasonable, and I love that the Bengals are spending money here. I gotta say this. They're not going to make the playoffs by any stretch. But when you factor in their off-season moves so far with the fact that they're going to add Joe Burrow, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they got to 6 wins next year. They'll be on the right track. I'm really optimistic about the Bengals' future. And that's something that I haven't been able to say in a long time, since AJ Green and Andy Dalton were still young. I do want to talk about Patrick Owasso really fast. I know that we don't know the financial details of the contract. We do know that he was only brought in for 1 year by the Jets, but he's a Jet now, and I really want to talk about him for a little bit. I don't mind the Jets bringing him in. He's a good player. He fell off last year, but there's talent there, and like I said before, the track record of being a Ravens defensive player means that teams are going to target you. It happens multiple times every offseason. The thing that I will say is there are some people speculating that this means that the Jets could cut Avery Williamson. I do not want the Jets to cut Avery Williamson for Patrick Owasso. If that's really what this means, then shame on Joe Douglas. Look, I know that Williamson was hurt last year. I understand that. But just take a look at what he did in 2018 for the Jets. 73.9 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus. And I'll tell you, because I watched every game, he played better than that grade. Year before that, 80.4 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus for the Titans. You're going to cut him for Patrick Owasso? All due respect to Owasso, he's a good player. He's not a great player. Is Williamson a great player? No, but he's very good. Avery Williamson is better than Patrick Owasso. You want to tell me that they now have a lot of depth at inside linebacker? That's true. But we still have training camp to get through. We still have the preseason to get through. Injuries happen all the time. I really don't think this means that the Jets are cutting Avery Williamson. I know it's been speculated a lot, even before this signing, but I just don't think it's going to happen. And if it does, shame on Joe Douglas. Really. There was a pretty noticeable death yesterday in the football world. Not the most household of names, but he was a very, very, very good AFLer, and I really want to talk about him. And that is Mike Stratton, who passed away yesterday after a fall. It's very ironic that he died after a fall, because old school Bills fans will know him as one of the toughest players in their team's history. The hit heard around the world, where he knocked Keith Lincoln out of the game. Unreal hit. Brutal hit. If someone asks you what old school football looked like, just show them that clip. You can do a lot worse. This is a guy who was really an afterthought by a lot of people. He went undrafted in the NFL, and in the AFL he lasted until the 13th round. Really, the only guy who believed in him was Lou Saban. Saban put him at linebacker with Harry Jacobs and John Tracy to form one of the best linebacking crews in football history. They played together for 62 consecutive games. That's a record. In 1964 and 1965, opposing teams didn't have a 100-yard rusher against the Bills. A huge reason why the Bills won the AFL championship those years. The hit heard around the world was in the 64 AFL championship game. In 1963, the San Diego Chargers slaughtered the Boston Patriots in the AFL championship game 51-10. And Keith Lincoln was the seminal reason for that. He was the MVP. He accounted for 339 all-purpose yards. That is insane. And the Chargers were already at a disadvantage in that game because Lance Allworth was out. So they really needed Lincoln to step up again if they were going to repeat as champions. And Lincoln got off to a strong start in that game, but it didn't last for too long as Mike Stratton delivered a devastating hit to Lincoln. It broke a rib and forced him out of the game. I hate to say it, I really do, but that's a legitimate strategy. If you know that a player is gonna kill you in a game, it's a legitimate strategy to want to injure him. I'm sorry, it's the truth. I don't advocate for it. It's wrong. If it's a clean hit, which the Stratton hit was, then there's nothing you can do about it. But if it's a dirty hit, that's wrong. But Stratton knew that he needed to do something about Lincoln, so he put a little extra on that hit. It knocked Lincoln out of the game, and the Bills won by a score of 20-7. Stratton finished his career as a 6-time AFL All-Star. He's on the Buffalo Bills Wall of Fame and made the AFL all-time second team. May he rest in peace. Alright, here's my exclusive interview with Tim Rooney.
You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I am fortunate enough to be talking to Tim Rooney, the author of John Beilein at Michigan, of Basketball Revival. Tim, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. So we'll go chronologically throughout his Michigan tenure. How did he first get to the Wolverines?
He came from West Virginia, where he had some recent success going both to the Sweet 16 one year and the Elite 8, and started gaining some national attention at that point for those NCAA tournament runs. But looking back even farther, he had a really impressive career, winning at every stop and continuing to get promoted along the way. As the guy that started as a JV high school coach and just kept on moving up the ladder and winning at every single level that he coached at. Ultimately winding up at the University of Michigan.
And the thing that people don't realize about Beilein is he was never an assistant coach. He started out as a head coach at a JV high school. I just think that's incredible, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. He every step of the way he's done it his way, and he points to that as really important. That he was sort of forced to figure out what he believed in and implement it, and then make adjustments where needed, and really had to own it every step of the way. And that's something he did, and he points to that as an important part of his success.
So what can you tell us about Beilein's seasons with Manny Harris?
He inherited Manny on the roster, really talented kid, but the team just hadn't been able to get over the hump with him under the previous coach, Tommy Amaker. And very talented. Beilein had some success with him. That was their first tournament team. Was Manny, and then Deshaun Sims was on it as well, both of whom had spent some time in the NBA. They defeated Clemson in the first round and then ran into Blake Griffin and the Oklahoma Sooners in the second round and couldn't quite get past him. But Manny was John Beilein's first player from Michigan to reach the NBA.
Now, you touched on Deshaun Sims. I'd like you to go a little more in depth on him if you can. Can you lay out Beilein's time with him?
Yeah, it was similar to Manny. Those guys were both at the program when he arrived, and part of that transition period, both did a pretty good job of buying into Coach Beilein's lessons and tenets of how he wanted to run the program. And Deshaun was a very good rebounder, shot blocker, big man that provided that presence down the middle that allowed some of Beilein's first teams to have some success.
Talking to Tim Rooney, the author of John Beilein at Michigan, a basketball revival. So would you be able to describe Michigan's 2012-13 team?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fun team. They had gone to the tournament the year before. They actually had won the Big Ten regular season. Trey Burke was a freshman that year. It was 2011-12. Tim Hardaway Jr. was a sophomore. They had Zach Novak and Stu Douglas were seniors who were kind of the glue guys for Beilein's program in those years. And that was a team that really overachieved to win the Big Ten. And unfortunately, the fact that they maybe weren't quite talented enough to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament manifested itself in a first-round loss to Ohio University. And that off-season, Beilein brought in his best recruiting class yet, 5 players. Mitch McGarry was probably the highest ranked of the bunch. Glenn Robinson not too far behind. Karis LeVert, Spike Albrecht, and Nick Stauskas. And that group, along with Burke and Hardaway, took the program to a whole nother level. They stormed out the gates, got off to an incredible start, were ranked number 1 in the country for a period of time, and everybody just kind of gelled shockingly quickly. He had really nailed all his evaluations on the players, even the ones that weren't necessarily highly ranked. Nick Stauskas was a solidly ranked player, but certainly not somebody that everybody was expecting to come in and make such an impact in year one and wind up being a top 10 pick after a second year. Spike Albrecht was not recruited by anybody else and wound up being an important player on the team that freshman year. And Karis LeVert's story was actually really fascinating. That loss to Ohio the year before in the tournament meant that Ohio's coach, John Groce, wound up getting a head coaching offer to University of Illinois, which he took. He moved on. Karis LeVert no longer had a head coach. The school he was going to reopened up his recruitment and wound up going to Michigan. And again, another player that had an impact his freshman year and went on to great things, still to this day. But that team struggled towards the end of the season and kind of slid a little bit. Looked like maybe they had hit their stride too early. Maybe the freshmen hit the proverbial wall, etc. But they took off in the tournament. The real memorable moment is Trey Burke against Kansas, number 1 seed Kansas in the Sweet 16. He hit an unbelievable three-pointer from 27, 30 feet probably away over the outstretched hand of Kansas' Kevin Young. He was about a fingertip away from it. Burke rose up, hit it to tie the game, and then Michigan finished it off in overtime and won that one. Went on to absolutely romp Florida to reach the Final Four. Played a grinded-out type game with Syracuse. They won in the Final Four, and then faced Louisville for the national championship. Great game. Both teams played at a really high level, battled back and forth. Incredible performances by Spike Albrecht off the bench for Michigan, and unfortunately for Michigan, Luke Hancock matched his exploits for Louisville, and Louisville wound up pulling out that close game. But just a phenomenal season and a great coaching job.
Yeah, and that team was probably one of my favorite college basketball teams that I can remember. One guy who was really an underrated contributor for that team was Glenn Robinson. What can you tell us about Beilein's years with Robinson?
Yeah, GR3 is a great athlete. That coming in, that was sort of his biggest calling card. Pretty good shooter as well. Took a big jump from the time Michigan landed him. He was not ranked very highly as a recruit, but by the time he showed up on campus, he had kind of flown up recruiting rankings as everybody realized his athleticism, his burgeoning skill level, obviously his bloodlines with his father being former number 1 overall pick, great player at Purdue and great NBA player. So he played a complementary role that freshman year, receiving end of a lot of alley-oops, which set himself up in the corner, be an option for that corner 3 for Burke and others coming off the dribble, and got to work on the boards. Played 4 for most of his career, just about all his career. He was sort of a perfect 4-man for Beilein's offense. He likes bigs that have some skill level, that can handle the ball a bit, that can shoot, and he was able to check off all those boxes. Steady improvement. Came back his sophomore year and developed a little bit more. Nick Stauskas really took ownership of that team, but Glenn continued to be a solid piece of that team, and then decided to head to the NBA that following the season, where he was a second-round pick, and has bounced around for a few different teams since then.
But he won a dunk contest. That's all that matters, right?
He's always able to do that. There's no doubt.
So, can you lay out Beilein's seasons with Derek Walton?
Sure. Yeah, Derek arrived with Zach Irvin for that 2013-14 team. He had big shoes to fill. Jumped in there with Trey Burke having departed. He became the starting point guard. No pressure there. But he went out and did his job. He didn't try to do too much that year, and really did a nice job initiating the offense, and allowed Nick Stauskas to thrive. Shot threes at a really good percentage. But after Stauskas, Glenn Robinson, and Mitch McGarry left, there was a couple years there that things stagnated a little bit. Walton hadn't quite taken the leap yet. The team dealt with a ton of injuries. Walton had some injuries along the way, and his sophomore and junior years weren't quite up to the team standards that they had set over the years before. The junior season ended with a loss to Notre Dame in the NCAA tournament, and as he pointed out afterwards, it was really the team's inability to get stops that was the cause for it. They had been such a great offensive team. That's what Beilein was known for. That was his track record. Beautiful offenses, outscore your opponent, and sort of a reckoning at that point that they need to step up their defense. And that offseason, Beilein went out and hired Billy Donlin to serve as his de facto defensive coordinator and make defense really a focus point for the team going forward. And Walton's senior year, those results started to show up a little bit. And most importantly, the second half of Walton's senior year, he really became the alpha dog that the team needed, that he was capable of doing. Second half of his senior year, he played about as good basketball as anybody has played at Michigan under Beilein. He took all the big shots. He had the ball in his hands. He initiated everything. The pull up off the dribble three, became a huge component of the offense. He was scoring. He was as good a rebounding point guard as you'll see. He's providing leadership and really carried the team down the stretch, and they had a nice little tournament run, beating Oklahoma State, and then upsetting Louisville in the second round to go to the Sweet 16, where they took on Oregon. Great game. Came down the final shot. The guy that Michigan wanted to take it took it, and I think everybody expected him to make it. But unfortunately, Derek Walton's last second shot rimmed out. They lost by 1 to an Oregon team that wound up going on to the Final Four. And Walton wound up in the NBA as well after a quick detour abroad, and has turned into a solid bench player on a couple different teams.
Yeah, nothing wrong with his career so far. Talking to Tim Rooney, the author of John Beilein at Michigan, A Basketball Revival. So would you be able to describe Michigan's 2017-18 team?
Yep. Yeah, that was another fun team. Entered the year really low expectations, to be honest. Billy Donlin had wound up moving on after a year to go to Northwestern for a variety of reasons. And John Beilein wound up hiring a guy named Luke Yaklich from he and DeAndre Haynes both came from Illinois State. And a bit of a surprise. People hadn't really heard about them. But Yaklich wound up being such a big difference maker for them. And early on, the team looked pretty marginal. Beilein had a great quote at the beginning of the year, towards the end of the year. He said, back in the preseason, if you had told me this team would win 30, I'd have told you to come watch us practice. I really felt like this was a remodeling type of year. So, that's sort of how the head coach saw it. They didn't have a point guard that was ready to step in. Xavier Simpson was there, but he's not the Xavier Simpson that he became at that point in time. He was really tentative. He didn't want to do much on offense, and he got outplayed. They had brought in a graduate transfer, Jaron Simmons, as a point guard option. He struggled there as well. And then they had freshman Eli Brooks, and really all three struggled earlier in the year. They trailed North Florida, Central Michigan, and Southern Mississippi in the second half of 3 games early on. But, as time went on, Xavier Simpson found his confidence. Everybody else kind of slotted into their roles. They had Charles Matthews eligible, a transfer from Kentucky who had sat out a year. Duncan Robinson, great three-point shooter. Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman was their 2 guard. They had Mo Wagner, big man. And as time went on, they just kept gelling. They got better, and they got better, and they got better. And over the season's final month, they got hot. They wound up winning the Big Ten tournament for the second time in a row. And then they had a tremendous NCAA tournament. Ran all the way to the national championship. I think the most memorable moment of that one is freshman Jordan Poole's last-second three-pointer to beat Houston. And they had a little bit of luck with the way the bracket shook out. Not necessarily running into the toughest opponents along the way, but they handled all comers until they faced, the best team in the tournament that year, and maybe in a lot of years, Villanova squad that with Dante DiVincenzo absolutely lights out in the national championship game. It was a little too much for them to handle, but a really memorable run. Mo Wagner's development that year was a blast to watch. He had an incredible Final Four game, against Loyola.
Sister Jean.
What's that?
Sister Jean, Loyola.
Yeah, exactly. Sister Jean was there with Loyola, and even she couldn't stop Mo Wagner that night.
I got to tell you, going into that draft, I'm a big Brooklyn Nets fan, and the Nets really needed a stretch four. And I was praying that Mo Wagner would be there, but he was taken, I think, 3 picks before the Nets had the opportunity to take him. He was taken by the Lakers, and granted, his career hasn't gone the way that I thought it would, but I think Wagner would have been a really good Net. I also saw Michigan win the Big Ten tournament that year at the Garden with my friend Dominic, and I was so impressed with the way Michigan played that I actually picked them to go to the national finals against Villanova, and I picked Villanova to win, so I'm very proud of myself for getting that championship game right.
That is pretty impressive. But no, if you were watching, you saw what might happen with that team. They absolutely peaked at the right time, and I think if you look at any of the advanced metrics, like on BartTorvik.com or Ken Palm, like you were able to see over the last couple of months that they arguably had played as the best team in the country, or certainly one of the best top couple teams, even if the rankings up to that point hadn't necessarily suggested.
Great coaching job by Beilein that year. No question about that. All right, Tim, I'll get you out on this. Why did Beilein leave the Wolverines?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that likes a challenge. There's no doubt about that. And he took on about the biggest one there that maybe exists in sports.
Bit off more than he could chew, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think at every step of the way, he was looking for the next thing. That he loved building. He's a builder. He loves taking a program that's maybe not there and turning it into something special. And he did it at so many different stops along the way. And he loves the challenge. And ultimately, he goes to Cleveland to coach the Cavaliers, and the sort of problems pop up from the beginning. I think in hindsight, I don't think he appreciated the immensity of the challenge, particularly in building a culture at the NBA level. It involves a whole different sort of skill set or parameters than doing so at the college level does. And I don't think he was given a whole lot of help by his front office, who, basically just kept the same players around that didn't fit his system, many of whom were, pretty disgruntled and probably weren't going to react well to anybody, and obviously just a lack of talent as well. So in hindsight, certainly the opposite of a match made in heaven.
No, definitely, but he'll get another opportunity in college. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I think if he wants to go back to coaching college next year, he'll have his choice of any available jobs.
All right, Tim, thank you for your time.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, that was Tim Rooney. His book is John Beilein at Michigan, A Basketball Revival. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Tomorrow, you're going to get an exclusive interview that I did with Rich Marazzi. I'm keeping the college theme up, but I'm moving over to football because this guy knows everything about Yale football that there is to know. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed talking to him. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that one thing you can learn as a Mets fan is that when you buy your tickets, you can always bank on seeing the bottom of the ninth.